Verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That's quite an all-encompassing statement, isn't it? What profit has a man from all of his labor in which he toils under the sun? The book of Ecclesiastes is undoubtedly written by David's son, King Solomon. Now you can get the books and read 400 pages about why it wasn't him or because of the differences of language and all of that. But haven't you ever written a letter one day and had it sound one way and then 2 days later you're like a different person and, and it's a completely different deal, and so they kind of get into this. You notice that he identifies himself as the son of David. That qualifies for Solomon, king in Jerusalem. But you notice in verse 12, it says that I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Solomon was the only one that meets that requirement, because immediately following him would be his son Rehoboam, who, acting under ill-advised counsel and his own foolishness, ended up splitting the kingdom into the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. So Solomon would be the final one who would rule over all of Israel from Jerusalem. From then on, whoever ruled in Jerusalem ruled only over Judah. So it's got to be Solomon. He identifies himself as the preacher here, and this is still one of the poetic books in the Bible in terms of its categorization. It's structured like that in a beautiful poetic way. And he kind of is tying himself to the title of the book. The word Ecclesiastes means to assemble. It can mean to call out. And so here you have the preacher calling the people, really, God calling the whole world out to listen to this man's sermon, what he has to say in this message. And so the preacher's going to deliver a message. And the message that he's going to deliver is the folly of trying to find fulfillment in life, verse 3, under the sun. And I want you to notice those last 3 words of verse 3. You can circle them, or you can mark them, or you can put them in that photographic memory of yours. It will be repeated over and over again through the book. And what the book of Ecclesiastes is all about, that word, that phrase, under the sun, is repeated 29 times in the book. And here is a man who is going to try and find fulfillment in life within the context of creation, under the sun, under the S-U-N. He's going to try and find fulfillment in life apart from the S-O-N, the Son of God, capital S-O-N of God, and he's going to try and find fulfillment in life under the sun. In other words, he's going to eliminate God from his thinking altogether, and he's just going to look at the creation. And he's going to engage himself as fully as a human being can into the creation and see if he can find fulfillment in it. And so that's what he's going to attempt to do here, find fulfillment in life under the sun. Now Solomon was in a unique place to give himself to that. Certainly in his generation, probably more wealthy than any man alive today, whether we're talking about the Sultan of Brunei or Bill Gates or whatever it might be. He was a man who had unlimited resources as the king of Israel. David had left so much wealth to him. It was said that during Solomon's reign that silver counted for nothing. Those of you with silver jewelry, dirt clods. It was silver during his reign. It was counted as rocks. It was worth nothing. If it wasn't gold, it was worth nothing. Everything was made of gold. All of the shields made of gold. All of the cups made of gold. All of the plates made of gold. All of the silverware made of gold. Gold everywhere. The buildings lined with gold. If it wasn't gold, it wasn't, worth anything. So fabulously wealthy, very powerful. David had left Solomon as the most powerful man in that region of the world, in his day. Whatever he wanted to do, he could do. And so all of this wealth, he had all kinds of power. He had the ability to buy any mind-altering, substances that he wanted to give himself to. He had, no limit in terms of connections, that if he wanted to go that way, there was no limit as it related to his education. He could receive and bring to himself the finest teachers in the world to learn wisdom and to learn knowledge. And as far as trying to find satisfaction as it relates to sexual experience, he had 1,000 wives and concubines. And so he could give himself fully to any kind of sexual expression that he wanted to. So no limitations. Uniquely qualified in man's history if any man could find fulfillment in life under the sun, this was going to be the guy that would find it. And what Solomon does, and one of the reasons that God includes this in His Word, is in order to save every one of us in this room and every one of us in the world from ever going down that path. Because there is a tendency within our lives to try and to think that, if only I had this, then I'd be satisfied. If only I was so wealthy that silver was like dirt clods. If only I had 10 wives. If only I had a greater education. If only I had that promotion at the job, or what, in greater power. If only I had this thing. And the crazy thing about life is you think, soon as I get this, then I'll get satisfied. And soon as you get it, what happens? It's got like today, let's say 48-hour satisfaction. They should say satisfaction guaranteed 48 hours. Hey, they can give a guarantee that it won't break down longer than that, but they can't give a guarantee that it'll satisfy longer than that. Because we immediately move on to the next thing. Because it doesn't satisfy. We're empty. And so we get the car and we're satisfied with the 97 car till we see the 98 catalog. And then now we're rolling on that whole thing. So there is that idea. And even within this room, the idea that as soon as I get that bigger and better, whatever it might be, then I'll be satisfied. And Solomon teaches you that you can get the whole world under the sun and you will never be satisfied. You'll never be satisfied. All you'll be is empty and frustrated. The lesson of the whole book is found at the very end of the book, and I'd like you to turn to it all the way to the end of chapter 12. So we lay a bit of a foundation before we head into it. He said in verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. He says, and this was a conclusion of trying to find life under the sun, life apart from a relationship with God. He said, here's the conclusion, fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And Solomon came to a place in his life where he realized that fulfillment in life could never ever be found under the sun, and it will never be found under the sun. No man will ever be satisfied and fulfilled in life in the context of the creation. The only way that man will ever be satisfied in his life can only be found in a relationship with God, where I am in a relationship with Him in which I am in submission to His commandments. And one of the reasons is, as we'll see a little bit later, is that you and I have been created for relationship with God. That's what we've been created for. And until a man or a woman is doing what they've been created for, will never be fulfilled. Fulfillment can only be found in doing what I've been created for. And if I've been created for a relationship with God, created in His image for that relationship, then I will never be satisfied or fulfilled until I'm engaged in that which I've been created for. And we've been created for relationship with God. Now, this book of Ecclesiastes has one supreme lesson. We just read it at the end of chapter 12. And the supreme lesson is that fulfillment can only be found in a personal relationship with God. One of the things that will happen is you deal with sometimes those who are involved in the cults or some different religious systems and all this kind of thing. They'll try and quote out of Ecclesiastes, different things about soul sleep and all kinds of different stuff to try and prove their point. And what they don't understand is they're quoting a guy who is until the very last two verses, he's dealing with everything purely from a humanistic standpoint. That man is the greatest of creation, and that, he's smarter than everyone else, and that his truth is what can lead a man into fulfillment. And so you can't build doctrine on some of the things that Solomon says in his search, because he comes to a lot of wrong conclusions before he finally hits the truth. You can't pull any of these verses out and say, I'm going to base a doctrine on this, unless it's supported by other parts of the Bible. I remember my best friend growing up in high school was a Mormon, and a great guy, Carl Gunderstrup. And I met him years later after I had become a Christian, and we spent an evening talking about these things and Mormonism and Christianity and all. And he kept going back to Ecclesiastes, and I kept talking to him and saying, Carl, we can't do that. This is a man that's on a search here. This isn't truth he's discovered till the very end. And so often, and also with the Jehovah's Witnesses and others, there'll be that attempt to build upon that book, and we can't do that. The key words to the whole book the phrases is vanity and vexation of spirit. And what that means is emptiness and frustration. Vanity and vexation of spirit, emptiness and frustration is what he describes life as being under the sun, apart from God. The word vanity is used 37 times in this book, 37 times. And I don't think that you can encapsulate life apart from God any better than those two words, empty and frustrating. Those two words encapsulated my life absolutely perfectly before I came to know the Lord. It was empty and my life was frustrating. Like most of the rest of the world, I been following the whole funeral and the death and all concerning Princess Diana. And I didn't see anything on the television. Someone taped some for me, but I didn't see the funeral. But I read in the paper that Elton John was going to change the words to A Candle in the Wind and change it for Princess Diana. I was driving up the freeway yesterday, and I was just thinking about Elton John. I was in high school. I was a junior and a senior in high school when Elton John came on the scene. Rocket Man and Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting and all. And I had a friend, Ken Womack, on the basketball team, and he wrote Rocket Man all over his tennis shoes. He was anything but a Rocket Man. He was about 6'3", 240, but he could set a mean screen, I'll tell you, in basketball. And, Benny and the Jets and Your Song, which I saw that President Clinton felt that Candle in the Wind was his favorite. I thought that Your Song was the best they ever put together. But I was thinking about him because I've traveled through life on this planet with him those years. And here he is, fabulously wealthy, famous all over the world. And I thought about, as I've read about his life through the years, and able to, the bisexual and into the drugs till, he in public with his own vomit all over him, and absolutely captured by these things. And I just thought to myself, what in the world does he comfort himself in the face of death? What does he do? And no, not a condemning thing towards him or anything, but just how does he deal with these things? How does he deal with what he is in the middle of and what he's facing? What does he do about the emptiness in his life? You can only eat so many meals. You can only travel to the famous spots of the world so many times. You can only live life to a certain height under the sun. And after a while, it doesn't matter if you've got $50 million to spend on it. Pretty soon all of it becomes boring. And pretty soon it's as empty and frustrating as mowing the lawn would be for you and I. And so you just look at that. And I remember before I came to know the Lord, those two words, emptiness and frustration, as it relates to my life, I can still feel it. And I think about when I was growing up in high school, of course, The monster band was the Beatles, and monster band number 2, don't create an argument over it, was the Stones. And I worked as a lineman with a Stones freak for the phone company, and he just would not accept the fact that the Stones were number 2. And they weren't in his mind. But here the Stones heading out, sponsored by Geritol in their latest concert thing that they're heading out there. Everyone was supposed to be dead before they're 30, and now they're making us wish that maybe. But I think about their lives. I really do. I have a friend who's a pastor. Every time he sees a famous person in the airport, he makes a beeline to him to share the gospel. Sensitively, love for them, but he makes a beeline for them. And I would say to you, those of you who are younger than me, I'm 42 years old. And if you're a teenager or you're whatever, and you look at someone who's 42 and you say, oh boy, they're probably not empty and they're not frustrated, and boy, I'm not going to witness to them. I'll tell you, concerning my age group, you witness to them. Apart from the Lord, it is empty and it's frustrating. And I would venture that if we asked the representation of all ages in this room, it'd be the same way. No matter how long you've been or how much you've experienced, all of those things, life is only empty and frustrating. You can only listen to Van Morrison sing Brown-Eyed Girl so many times before you just go, what is the point? What's the point? What is this answer? What question does it raise? It's neat. It gets you through, 3 minutes and 20 seconds of your life, or however long the song is, and it's supposed to be a celebration of youth and all of that stuff. But there comes a point in your life where you just stop and you look and you say, what in the world is this all about? And what's it all about, Alfie? We're on all these songs tonight, but I really like that. And that was the theme song to the Valley of the Dolls. And don't get me started on that. What's it all about, Alfie? Is it just for the moment we live? Or does life belong only to the strong, Alfie? And on it goes, and on it goes. But what is it all about? You can only listen to the oldies stations so many times before you look and you just go, what's there? What's there? And as we go through this, if we ever get to it, as we go through this, I have a sense that what's true of my generation was true of the generations before me and the ones behind me. It looks like my generation, the whole thing, as I head through Ecclesiastes. But I tell you, when I came to know the Lord, I was not rock bottom when I came to know the Lord. I had more stuff than almost anyone in my family in its history. I had a beautiful home. Beautiful wife. She's still beautiful. One child. Another child on the way. I had a great job. I had a great future. I had great health. And as I looked at everything that I had, I looked at it and I said, if this has not made me happy, if this has not satisfied me, then upgrading will never satisfy me. And I began to look for the Lord. And I was raised in the church for a few years, so I knew where to look when my time for searching came. And I gave my life to the Lord, and I got out of the emptiness, and I got out of the frustration. But there is that point, what you have, and you look and say, if I could only upgrade it by 10 or what, you'll upgrade it by 10, and in 2 days, you'll see what you didn't get Mediterranean tile in the entry. And so, I tell you, it's those 2 words, I mean, I can feel them to this day. I can feel life apart from the Lord in my heart, the emptiness of it. That's one of the reasons I want this body, I want you to be under the influence of this book. That's the whole world apart from the Lord. I don't care how much money gets thrown around. I don't care how much money gets spent on facelifts. I don't care how much money gets spent on this and that and all of these things to try and get away from death and to try and find fulfillment. Down deep in the deepest part of every life, it's empty and it's frustrating apart from God, because you cannot find fulfillment apart from what you've been created for. And we've been created for relationship with God. And I am so thankful to the Lord and to His Son, my Lord Jesus Christ, for delivering me from emptiness and frustration. I've said it before. I get more joy out of a piece of toast and a cup of tea in the morning in His presence, talking to Him and thinking about Him, than I did in all of the years put together that I had apart from Him. We've been made for that. Been made for that. John wrote and he said, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For that which is in the world, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, it's not of the Father, but it's of the world. And the world is passing away and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever." Jesus said, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven." Live for heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Paul wrote to the Colossians, and he said, "If then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God, and set your mind on things above and not on the earth." And when I read scriptures like that, when you've been pulled out of emptiness and frustration in the way that I was pulled out, and God gives a command, it's never in my mind a thing of, oh, I have to do that. To me, it is always, I get to do that. I get to live this life by the power of the Holy Spirit. And I love to live this life that He's called me into. Verse 4. Solomon begins to write about just the monotony of life, just this tiresome sameness of life under the sun. One generation passes away and another generation comes. But the earth abides forever. The sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. Anybody got some medication? The wind goes toward the south and turns around to the north, and the wind whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. All the rivers, as he speaks about the water cycle, run into the sea. Yet the sea isn't full. To the place from which the rivers came, they also return again. And so he's talking about now the creation, and as he looks at the creation, he talks about the earth, verse 4, the sun, verse 5, the wind, verse 6, the rivers, verse 7, and he just looks at creation. And when he only looks at creation in the context of under the sun, it just looks like this endless monotony of cycles. And that's the way that it is. And so you want to take and you want to remove God from my life by whatever means in this society, then you remove from my life the capacity to enjoy nature and to enjoy creation. I'll tell you, when I go to Yosemite, haven't been there in a while, raise the fees, don't want to deal with the crowds. But when I go there, you go there and you see all of that beauty. I never even enters my mind to say, isn't evolution beautiful? Isn't it wonderful? Never say it. I look at God at the sunset, and I look at all that's around me, the trees and those great sheer cliffs and all, and I just think, oh Lord. And this only speaks of your existence. Just tells us that you exist. Doesn't even begin to speak to us about your beauty and what you're all about. His Son came to do that, His love. And so there isn't ability to enjoy creation apart from the Creator and then celebrating the fact, Lord, oh, this is too much. This is so beautiful. I got a chance to drive up the Coast Highway 1 earlier this year, and I love to drive that once a year or so. I just love the coast. Big Sur and all of that was in the paper today. And I just drive down that and the ocean just goes out forever and the sheer cliffs and all of it. And I just pull the car over and I just stop and I just pray to the Lord. So Lord, I'm going to enjoy my Emmaus Road journey right here. And you're fabulous what you've done, what you've put together. But apart from the Lord, even nature becomes just monotonous. It's just these cycles, just some big, tireless, tiresome treadmill going around and around and around. Then in verse 8 he says, many things are full of labor. Man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear with hearing. And so when you live life under the sun, then life becomes just this endless search for the new. We see that all around us, don't we? What's the latest summer blockbusters that are going to come out? What's the new thing? I don't know what would Americans do if no movies came out for a summer? It'd be a crisis. I don't know. We'd probably start a war somewhere. I mean, imagine, what would people do with all of their time on their hands if there weren't these blockbusters that go? But why do they go? And they go and you think, it used to be 100 million was like, man, that's a great movie. You gotta make 100 million now for it to be, considered a reasonable kind of a movie and all. But there's that thing within the American people, and it's worldwide too. It's just that endless, let my eyes see more. Let my eyes see more. Let me hear more. Let me hear more. Let me hear more. And somewhere along this whole long stretch of it, somewhere I'm going to end up satisfied. And it never happens. It never happens. Never happens under the sun. It can never happen apart from the Lord. And so the billions that are spent on entertainment every year, trying to satisfy the eye and to satisfy the ear. That which has been is what will be, and that which is done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before. So in other words, you give yourself to all of the entertainment, you give yourself to all of the things that can be heard, all of the things that can be seen, and then what happens after a while? You look at it and after a while, it all seems the same. It all looks the same. It all sounds the same. It all just merges together into this big old, blur. I mean, how many movies can you see and engage yourself in before you look and you say, this is just saying the same old stuff. And they it all ends up being empty. And you look and say, oh, I've got to find a new movie star to make my hero, or a new, band to buy all of their albums or what, because now I'm empty and I need something new. The reason you're empty is because you're empty. You're empty. They can never satisfy. They can never fill that in your life. Verse 11, there is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. In other words, history just keeps repeating itself. And here Solomon writes, and he's just talking about the fact that, you think you make a big splash, and, Donald Trump and Bill Gates and all the different things make a big splash and all, and he's saying, within 2 generations, no one will remember you. No one will remember you. Within 2 generations on this earth, no one will remember me. It doesn't matter how big you are, how famous you are, how whatever, you're going to be forgotten. You're going to be forgotten. You're going to be replaced by the next new thing, because life is lived largely in that search for fulfillment under the sun. And so you're old news. Let's get on with the next thing. And that's the way that life is. I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I set my heart to seek and to search out wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. So he decides he's a little frustrated at life. It's empty. It's frustrating. And so what does he decide to do? He's going to go get himself an education. He's going to get an education. So what he's going to get here? So he decides to enroll in college, enroll in school, and he's going to get all this wisdom. He's going to get all that learning. He's going to get his PhD, a piled high in deep degree, and learn all of these things that men try to foist upon other men. He's going to try and find satisfaction in just greater education. And he's going to find out that's empty and frustrating too. So he says, I'm going to go learn everything about the creation. I'm going to go to a place where they won't teach me about God. I'm going to go to a place where they've gotten God out of the schools and all of that. I just want to go and learn about everything under the sun. Just the creation. Just the, what's in existence. And he said, this grievous task God has given to the sons of man by which they may be exercised. And I've seen all the works that are done under the sun. And indeed, all is vanity and grasping for the wind, frustration. He says, I studied it all. And we'll see later, Solomon, he studied all of the insects, he studied all of the animals, he studied all of the life cycles of the planet Earth, he studied geology, he studied everything. He said, I learned all of it, and it's all emptiness and frustration. Why? What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. In other words, he looked and he said, all I did was just study the problems to death. But nobody had an answer for him. Nobody had an answer for him. Nobody had an answer for how to change the way the world is. I'm not talking about the ozone. Problems in the earth are a lot bigger than the ozone. Problems in the earth, why is man the way that he is? Why is the earth the way that it is? Because of man. Why are we in the condition that we're in? And he looked and he said, all I did was just learn a bunch more questions, and there weren't any answers to the questions. And he said, I communed with my heart, saying, look, I've attained greatness. I've attained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. I'm the smartest guy in the whole world. He's saying, Bill Gates, idiot. Idiot. Nincompoop, doesn't know, ignorant. I know what, all of them. My wisdom has understood, my heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and I perceived that this also is grasping for the wind. I mean, I listened to all kinds of crazy things in those classrooms. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. He said, the more I learned, it just made me more full of grief, and it made me more sorrowful. To learn about problems without solutions is a very difficult thing. That's a tough class to go through, let alone go through 4 years of it or 16 years of it. And that's what he's in the middle of. We have some sayings that go something like this: ignorance is bliss. There's some truth to that. You say, you're ignorant. I'm happy. If you want to inform me of some problem, bring the solution with it, and then I'll listen to you. Otherwise, don't mess with me. Don't mess with me. So ignorance is... We have another saying, no news is good news. And one of the most refreshing things that can happen in life is to take a sabbatical from the news. Just to go someplace where you can't even find out what's happening in the world to save your life. It's amazing what happens to your blood pressure. This goes way down. You read the newspaper this last week? I'll keep you up to date, though. They're really concerned about this potential for a new plague in the world. There's a new virus, a new bug. There is nothing that we have in the whole world to stop it. Nothing. And it's surfacing here and there all over the world. And we think we're a long ways from those black plague, a long ways from the rats and the fleas and all of that stuff. Instantaneously on the face of this planet, a plague can hit. Instantaneously. And so these are things that you learn. Aren't you feeling good about that? I have no answer for you. I have no answer for it. But I mean, that's the way that it is. All of the things so often here, you pick up the newspaper and you learn about all of the diseases and and everything you eat, you forget eating anymore in life in the United States. Forget it. It's all, no good. But that's the way it is. With all of this knowledge, without solutions, without a context that's greater than us, a hope that is greater than us, it just sinks me further. And so what does he give himself to? Chapter 2. We are jamming. I said in my heart, come now, enough of this education stuff. He said, I'll test you with mirth, partying, and therefore enjoy pleasure, but surely this also was vanity. So he goes to the college campus and he gets the education there that he wants to get, and then while he's there, it's so depressing, there's no answers, nobody will let him see God there. He says, all right, the only way I can cope with this is to get drunk every weekend. So I'm going to enroll in San Diego State or Chico, two of the big party schools in California. Now, if you have family and friends there and all, I know you can be straight down there, but I mean, they are big-time party schools. But we look, and the newspaper articles come out, and we're so alarmed over the levels of alcohol and drug use on our college campuses, you know. We don't understand. All we did was just take every bit of hope away from them. We just took God away from them. Imagine now they just want to get stoned and drunk 24 hours a day in order to deal with it. I can't take it. And so we marvel at the cycle, but here's the cycle. And so in my generation, everyone's on the campuses. Everyone was going to go there. They were going to get smart. They were going to engage in the American way. They were going to do their parents proud. They go in there, all of a sudden, Life magazine saying that God is dead. And then what are you going to do after that? And then the flesh is pretty cooperative as it relates to everything. And so he says, all right, that's no good. The only way I can cope with that scene is to just be half stoned or half drunk all the time. And that's what he gave himself to. Just parties. Pleasure. I'm going to live for pleasure. The word mirth there, the idea, it means gladness. In other words, we would say today, nothing new under the sun. We would say, if it feels good, do it. That's exactly what he's saying right there. And the word pleasure there, it means to be good in the eyes of. In other words, one of them says, if it feels good, do it. The other one says, if it looks good, do it. That's what he gave himself to. Feels good, I'm going to do it. If it looks good, I'm going to do that. But surely, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, you know, this goony, drunken, stoned laughter that happens at these parties. He said, it's madness. And of mirth, what does it accomplish? And so he looked at it, and that was what his question was. You know, you can only go to so many parties. You can only drink so much of that stuff and smoke so much of that stuff, even if you don't inhale, and engage in all these kinds of things. And pretty soon, it becomes as boring as everything else. It has to. It becomes as boring as putting, jigsaw puzzles together. And so he gave himself to it, and he said, what in the world does this accomplish? What good does this do? One of the neat things about Solomon in this whole thing is that while he was partying, he couldn't stop thinking. I think there's hope for a partier as long as you don't stop thinking. And he didn't go into partying saying, all right, I'm going to waste my life on partying. He's looking for the reason for life under the sun. And so he said, all right, and a legitimate thing. I'll give myself to that. Maybe it's there. But he kept his mind open and his eyes opened, and when he ran the whole circuit of the thing, he finally looked at it and said, there is nothing here. I'll tell you, there is nothing there. There is nothing there. He said, I searched my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, and while guiding my heart with wisdom. He says, I'm getting drunk here, but I'm not stopping thinking. If this isn't going to satisfy me, if this isn't going to answer my questions, I'm going to be out of here on this thing. I'm sure not going to give myself to something that doesn't have an answer as it relates to the reason for life, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all of the days of their lives. Then he goes and he gets his education, and then in order to deal with that education, he engages, gets himself all drunk and all into pleasure and all of that. He finds all of that is no good, and so what does he do? He becomes a nice, conservative materialist now, in verse 4. And again, I'm talking about my generation, and I don't mean to rip the who off on it, but I mean, here they go, to get the education, now going to give ourselves to partying and that whole thing, and now, isn't it funny, my generation, the boomers, they're the worst materialists in the history of the world. The one thing that they began rejecting. And so now he says, all right, I'm going to give myself to, accumulating goods. I made my works great. I built myself houses. I planted myself vineyards, I got into land, I got into real estate and not just, low-end stuff. I got into the prestige kind of stuff. I made myself gardens and orchards and I planted all kinds of fruit trees and I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants, and I had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks, your motor vehicles and whatever, than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and special treasures of kings and the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, live entertainment, and so he had a great stereo system. It was all live. The latest CDs, all of the latest videos of the deal. I get all the male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kind. He gave himself now to materialism. And he said, so I became great. I'm the greatest. And excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. He said, I had prestige, I had reputation, I had power. And he said, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them, bought anyone. And I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor. And this was my reward from all my labor. And we'll start to see the repetition of labor works over and over. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done and on the labor in which I had toiled. Now he's become a workaholic in order to get all of this stuff more and more. And indeed, all of it was vanity and grasping for the wind frustration. There was no profit under the sun. It's neat now, though. He's trying all over the place. He's trying everything that our society tells us will bring satisfaction. And when he gets to the end of each one of them, he said it's empty and it's frustrating. Then he deals with a very interesting thing starting in verse 12. As he's engaging in all of this stuff, it begins to dawn on him. He begins to think about death. And that's one of the fears that every human being deals with. It's the fear of death. I don't care how rich, I don't care how famous, I don't care how young, I don't care how old, there's a realization that death's batting about 1,000 on planet Earth. It's about everyone who's born dies. Now, there's one empty tomb. Lord Jesus, that's where the hope is. But man looks at the scene and he realizes, okay, I got all of the houses. I got the swimming pool. I've got the servants. I've done all the partying in my youth. I got my education. I got all my degrees up on the wall. All those things. He reaches that time in life. Solomon probably writes this late in his life. And he's got all of that stuff, all of those accomplishments. And then all of a sudden he says, I've got all this stuff. And he begins to think about death. What am I going to do about death? And he says, then I turn myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Only what he has already done. In other words, whoever follows me, he can't do any more than I've done. I've done it all. Then I saw that wisdom exceeds folly as light exceeds darkness. I mean, if you're going to be wise, you got a choice between being wise or foolish. Pick wise. But the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I perceived that the same event happens to them all. In other words, a fool doesn't see death coming. He doesn't take the time to think about death coming to him. A wise man, he looks down and he sees death coming, but they both die. So what good is it to have the big education and you study death and you look at death and you know it's coming, but you're no better off than the fool if you don't have an answer for it. If there's no answer for it, it's going to whoop you just like it's going to whoop the fool. And he understands that. And so he said, so I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. I'm going to die. And why was I then more wise? Am I really smarter Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity, for there is no more remembrance of the wise than of the fool forever, since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise man die? The same as a fool. We'll all die of the same things, whether a person is wise or whether they're foolish. And again he talks about, as he's gained all of his prestige and all of his fame there in verse 16, and he talks about the fact that there's not going to be a remembrance of the wise. Again, 2 generations, you're old news. Even in your family. You think about that. Think about 2 generations back in your family. How often do you think about them on a daily basis? And if you don't think about them in your family, then who does think about them? Just, try and name the last 5 vice presidents of the United States. Or the last 5 losers in the Super Bowl. I mean, they almost the pinnacle in terms of fame worldwide, forgotten almost instantaneously. And so here he talks about this death. Now, one of the great things about this is that the sense that he starts to think about death. And he looks, though, at all of the stuff. He's got the education. He's had all the party background. He's got all the possessions. And he looks at it. He says, what good is any of this if there's no victory over death? Because he knows that death is no respecter of persons. It doesn't say, oh, boy, you got that degree? Whew, all right, 5 more years. No, it doesn't do that. It doesn't deal with that at all. I know for me, I could never be satisfied with any belief system in this world that does not address death. And some of the biggest religious systems in the world do not adequately address death. But if it does not address death, I don't have 2 seconds for it. Because what I'm going to believe in better have an answer for death. Or I'm not going to believe in it. I look at the Bible, and as I look at my own life, and I ask myself, even before I came to know the Lord, why do we die? Why do people die? Why does death exist at all? What happens after death? And I refuse to believe, this is me, I refuse to believe or to trust in any religious system that tries to talk to me about death and what happens after death that does not adequately address the questions of the former things. How did we get here? Why are we here? Why is man the way that he is? Why is the world in the condition that it's in? God spoke to the children of Israel through the prophet Isaiah, and I love the passage. The children of Israel, God's people, they're engaged in all kinds of idolatry, all kinds of little images in their house and all that they're bowing down to and all of that. And the Lord spoke through Isaiah, and He said to them, tell them to bring out all of their false gods and just take them, put them right out there in the street. Just put them out there. And then He said, let them speak to us of the former things, that we might know that they're God. Let them tell us of the things that are going to happen before they happen, that we might know that they're God. That's a test for any God that anyone would ever follow. Does it have an answer for the former things? Why are we here? How did we get here? What is this all about? Why is mankind the way that he is? That is a sinner. Why do we treat one another the way that we do? Why do we have the emptiness that we do? And no religious system that does not address the former things should ever be trusted in its explanation concerning the things that are going to come after death. I reject Buddhism on the basis of that. It's a wonderful moral system in many ways in terms of living a nice life on this earth, but it does not address the former things. And I will not trust any system that does not address the former things, by which I can test its veracity, its truthfulness. Why should I trust what it says about something that there's no proof for me to look at? It's requiring a blind faith of me when I can look at the Bible and there is nothing in all of the world, in my estimation, there's nothing in all of the world that so completely satisfies the questions of man and why we're here, how we got here, why we are the way that we are, other than those first 3 chapters of Genesis. Created in the image of God, fallen from that created condition by sin, separated from God because of that sin. All of that creation speaking of a creator, design speaking of a designer, all of that. Now, with that all built in place, now go ahead and speak to me about death and what's going to happen after death. But if you don't have those, can't answer those for me, I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to listen. And so here is this whole issue of death that he is grappling with. He says in verse 17, "Therefore I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit are grasping for the wind." This is a confession of a man who has everything. He said, "Therefore I hated life." No answer for death. I've tried everything that I know to try. Therefore I hated life. Interesting that the French humanist Voltaire said in the course of his life, he said, "I hate life, and yet I'm afraid to die." Well, let's just line up at his booth at the fair, huh? Let's grab all the tracts he's handing out, and yet so many people do. What are you going to do? You're going to follow a guy like that and follow what he teaches and the darkness of that thing? And that's what he comes to. There's no answer for death. There's no answer for life. Then I hate life, but death looks worse. And so, here I am. It's a miserable place. Then I hated all of my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And so here he begins to deal with the fact that he's worked hard. He's gained all of these. He's got the servants, he's got the houses, he's got the orchards, he's got the whole deal, and now he's getting older. He says, I've got all of this wealth, and what am I going to, toiled under the sun, and now I'm agonized because I've got to leave it to the guy who's going to come after me. In other words, he looks at the wealth and he says, what good does it do me? I can't take it with me. And there's that old story, Darrell and I were talking the other day about it, and rich man died, rich farmer died, and as his body was being taken in the hearse towards the cemetery, one of the people there, friends of the family, asked the son, said, what did he leave? The son said, everything. Left everything. When we leave, we're going to leave everything. That's all there is to it. Whether that's 2 quarters or whether that's $1 billion, we're going to leave it all. And we're not only going to leave it, you're going to leave it to somebody. And maybe you're going to take care of our national debt, leaving it. You want it to really be used well. So he says, he realized in verse 18 that he can't keep the wealth. And he says, and who knows whether the guy that follows me is going to be a wise man or a fool? Yeah, who knows? Who knows? Yet he'll rule over all of my labor. I give my whole life to this thing that I've toiled for and in which I've shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. I'm spending my whole life to gain this thing, and I may be leaving it to an idiot, to a fool. The sad thing is that Solomon did. He left it to a fool. Rehoboam followed him. And within 1 week, he split the kingdom. 1 week. It was all gone. And just astounding. I mean, his fears were founded. Much better to, leave the inheritance and leave, but don't forget to invest in the kingdom where you can look and say, yeah, that's going to do something where I know it's going to do something. And I'm not talking about this church. As you just look at what God is doing and have control over it and investing in those things. He said, therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all of the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. Verse 21, for there is a man whose labor is with wisdom and knowledge and skill, and yet he must leave his heritage to a man who hasn't labored for it. I'm going to leave it to a guy who didn't work for it. I'm going to leave it to a guy who didn't develop the character in working for it and earning it that's going to be necessary to oversee it. And that almost always ends in disaster. And again, as I said, with Solomon, it would happen. This also is vanity and it's great evil. For what has man for all his labor and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? In other words, what's it going to matter? What's all this wealth that I have going to matter 5 minutes after I'm dead? It don't matter one bit. It's not going to matter. For all his days are sorrowful and his work grievous. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. He's got all of this wealth and he thought, okay, I'm going to get all of this wealth. And as soon as I get a certain level of wealth, then I won't have to worry. Then I'll be satisfied. And then you get that level of wealth and now you got to worry about it. You thought, oh boy, And sometimes you think, oh boy, I'm going to buy a house when I'm young, and then I'm going to pay for that house before I get old, and that way when I'm older and I retire, I won't have to make house payments. And what you don't understand is you're going to pay about $1 million a year for your medical coverage. It's all going to go. It's all going to go. It all shifts. That it can't be found in that. It can't be found in that. It's all vanity. There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. And so here we get a little spark of truth that he kind of discovers here, and he just looks at the whole thing. He kind of comes up for air, and he kind of comes up as he comes up for air, and he kind of shouts out, don't forget to enjoy life in the course of it. Have a nice BLT once in a while. It's important. It is important to take the blessings. He's recognizing God blesses us, not to put us into bondage, but to enjoy it. It's okay. It's lawful. God wants us to enjoy ourselves. And so he says, verse 25, for who can eat and who can have enjoyment more than I? And with all that he had. For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting that he may give to him who is good before God. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. And so God takes from the evil, and it ultimately has its way of going over to the good. And so here he is grappling with the meaning in life.